Welcome to Microsoft Ignite. My name is Matt Call, and I am a Principal Product Manager on the Microsoft Intune team. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about securing devices with Microsoft Intune in your journey towards Zero Trust. First, we're going to talk a little bit about how Intune fits into the Zero Trust story. Talk a little bit about adaptive access and conditional access, which goes right along with Intune and Zero Trust, and how Intune fits into that adaptive access story, which is a key pillar of Zero Trust. Next, we'll pivot to unified endpoint management, talking a little bit about how your organization can benefit from having all the visibility in one single surface or one single plane. And we'll close it out by talking about least privilege and some tools and investments that Microsoft's making in making sure that your organization can run with least privilege. Here you'll see the Zero Trust Foundation. Zero Trust at Microsoft, or Microsoft views Zero Trust, is anchored in 3 pillars. We need to verify each explicit transaction. We need to make sure that our end users are executing with least privilege. And then we need to assume that the bad guys are already in. We need to assume breach. We do that through 2 main functions. We want to protect the identities, and we want to protect the endpoints. And of course, when we protect the identities and the endpoints, we want to make sure that the resources those endpoints are accessing are safe and checks are happening at access. So policy enforcement is key here in policy evaluation. We do this through a few different implementations at Microsoft. We do this first through strong authentication. These are things like requiring MFA, requiring FIDO keys, requiring Windows Hello for Business, requiring a strong credential, right? These credentials make it harder or impossible to phish, and don't just prove what you know, they prove what you have, which is the first implementation tactic for strong authentication. Next, we want to use adaptive access controls. This is in comparison to something like static access controls, where a user would receive access to a resource, and that access would be granted until at such a time it was revoked. Now, adaptive access links very closely to conditional access. Conditional access, we have the ability to evaluate the user identity, the risk associated with that user identity. In addition, the device and the device identity and the risk associated with that device in context with the resource they're accessing. It gives enterprises rich tools to be able to say, when I'm coming from this device as this user to this resource, I should have these gates and controls in place to gain a level of access. And finally, we want to unify endpoint management to a single space, so there's no guesswork in what's configured and what's deployed to your devices. This means configuring policy and apps all from a single location and pairing that policy and app experience with the user's end user experience, maybe via a tool like Endpoint Analytics. First, let's pivot into adaptive access and how Intune helps power that. So as you'll see here, adaptive access is about verifying access at every attempt. We want to allow access, maybe. We want to require additional credentialing, maybe things like MFA. And then we want to limit access if these conditions aren't met or potentially block access. The point here is this is not statically defined. As a user goes to access that resource, as we mentioned before, the conditions under which they're accessing it determine whether they get the level of access they've requested or not. In conditional access, we define these as grant controls, and these grant controls can include things like the user's identity risk, and then more importantly for this conversation and what we'll dive into here, the device's management and identity posture. Intune provides unique value to the device transaction, allowing you to define compliance policies for your device, and then Intune can measure the device to make sure it meets the compliance values that you've defined. This results in an is compliant value. Let's take a little bit deeper look into how that's generated. So now on the slide, what you'll see is 2 different resources or 2 different objects. On the left, you'll see a computer, which in theory has a user on it, and that device should be managed by Microsoft Intune. On the right-hand side, you'll see conditional access protected resources, and these resources could be any resource that conditional access has been implemented for, and that allows you to define rules and grant conditions to allow access to those resources. Before we get into that access, let's talk a little bit about the device and how we can measure that device. For this piece of the discussion, let's consider 2 facets: Microsoft Intune as a management tool, and Microsoft Defender for Endpoint as a security piece, security tooling or security cloud. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint could be replaced with any third-party MTD that we support integration with Intune for this discussion. But just to keep it simple, we're going to use Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Now, if you look on the slide, what you'll see device signals. These device signals are a generic way of saying Microsoft Intune is getting a set of data about the device, and Defender for Endpoint is getting an additional set of data about the device, with maybe some overlap. Microsoft Intune's data is based around device inventory, things like OS version, different things that are measured at check-in when the device is doing its normal check-ins with Microsoft Intune to get policies, apps, etc. This can be for any platform, not just Windows, but we're just showing Windows here for sake of argument. Next, the security tooling on the Microsoft Defender side of the house are getting signals not only about the inventory, but about potentially behaviors that are happening on the device. It's establishing those behaviors and looking at existing patterns or indicators of compromise to determine, is this device healthy? And is it doing things that are risky or not, or so on and so forth. Now, Intune has a key component, which you'll see on the right side of the screen here, known as the Intune Compliance Engine. Just for illustration, it's shown on the right. It lives inside of the Microsoft Intune infrastructure. What happens is this compliance engine looks at policies that have been defined in your organization, things like minimum OS version, for example. And when the device checks in with Microsoft Intune, it's checking the inventory that was last received to make sure that your device is compliant with the policies that you've set. Furthermore, security vendors like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint can provide risk signals to Microsoft Intune to be used as part of that compliance transaction. It's important to note that compliance is generated in one of two ways. In this scenario, either when the device checks in, we trigger a compliance evaluation to make sure that the device matches the compliance policies you've defined in your enterprise. Also, when the device receives that signal from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint or another security vendor that we support to ensure that, hey, when that risk changes, we want to make sure that it matches or adheres to the values, the policy values that are required by my organization. Depending on that compliance state and the output of that state, we're going to then write a compliance value to Azure Active Directory on the object itself. So that way, when Azure Active Directory goes to process an authentication transaction that involves the device, it can quickly and efficiently determine if the device is compliant, or in other words, has the device met the compliance standards that my organization has defined for it. This again includes risk signals that are coming from Defender for Endpoint or other partners that we support integration for, as well as compliance policies and signals we get through Microsoft Intune. Now let's see how this actually works. So if I'm an end user on a device and I go to access a conditional access protected resource, during that transaction, the resource itself or the authentication layer for that transaction says, access to this resource matches a conditional access policy, and I require the device is compliant. Conditional access, internal to Azure Active Directory, looks quickly and says, is this device compliant or not? And if that device is compliant, then the transaction is allowed to proceed. If the device is not compliant for some reason, Azure Active Directory will redirect the end user to a remediation flow that allows the end user to take actions or gives them insight into why their device isn't compliant and why they may be getting limited access to resources. The end user then has the ability to rectify the situation, bring the device back into a compliant state, or there are more common scenarios like the end user is trying to access a resource from a device that just simply isn't managed. So they'll be guided on managing that device or bringing that device into management. Now that we've discussed how conditional access plays into that scenario, let's talk a little bit about how securing your devices with unified endpoint management can help. So as we transition here, what we should look at is unified endpoint management as a single pane of glass to configure and manage your devices. This includes things like device compliance that we talked about previously, also expand into device configuration, as well as user experience like we provide with Endpoint Analytics in Microsoft Intune. The goal here is to apply consistent compliance and security configurations regardless of the platform the user is using or how that platform was born into management, whether that's a bring your own device or a BYOD scenario, or whether that's a device that was born as a corporate managed, corporate owned device. We want to provide a single instance or a single area for enterprises to configure, manage, and gain insights about those devices without having to guess. One location where all of our management needs are met, and we were able to deploy and manage those configurations, settings, compliance values, etc. There are two main ways to get security configurations deployed to your devices. First, you can use Microsoft Intune or Endpoint Configuration Manager. These are existing management channels for devices today, and you can deploy security configurations directly from the cloud on either of those entities. The device is born in the cloud. It's leveraging the mobile device management channel. You can deploy a set of configurations to that device to make sure it's secure and in the state that you expect. The device is on-premise, managed by Endpoint Configuration Manager alone. You can leverage our tenant-attached functionality to deploy things like antivirus policy, firewall policy, etc., to the device to make sure that the device is getting the same policies that you define in Endpoint Manager in the cloud or in Intune, but bringing those configurations back down and enforced by your on-premise components. So the second way to bring your devices into the Endpoint Security Blade for configuration and management is through a feature that we made generally available in the beginning of 2022, known as Security Management for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. This allows organizations to seamlessly bring devices into Endpoint Manager without the need to do a full enrollment. In this scenario, Defender for Endpoint seamlessly enrolls, the client components themselves seamlessly enroll into Microsoft Intune to allow you to deploy the same antivirus policy, the same firewall and endpoint detection response policy that you would deploy to other aspects of your environment. This gives you that single configuration to all of your devices with a consistent configured experience, regardless of how the device reports into Endpoint Manager to receive that policy. But unifying endpoint security management is more than just a set of controls. It's about breaking down and increasing the collaboration between two different enterprise organizations, the security and the management teams. Too often, these teams meet on the endpoint. We want them to meet in the service. We want them to have the visibility and experiences that allow them to have insight into what each other are doing. This will lower the cost of things like troubleshooting, triaging devices, as well as the cost that's associated with determining the configuration coming from each of these management planes. You can ensure that you have a consistent configured experience regardless of if you're in security or you're in IT. In addition to increasing collaboration and removing those barriers between organizations inside of an enterprise, we also want to increase the capability. We've done that by enhancing something that we call the settings catalog or a unified settings platform. This is now generally available. There's over 14,000 settings available for configuration, and we strive to have zero-day support for new releases and platforms. This provides a consistent platform for us to build our settings and configuration experiences on with common elements and common properties across all settings that are used in Microsoft Intune. This has also been extended to Power Endpoint Security, with all new profiles being created on this new unified settings platform and us having plans over the next few quarters to bring all existing policies to that platform. This provides a consistent user experience or a consistent admin experience no matter where you interact with our settings platform. Whether it's in our device configuration blade or endpoint security or somewhere else, you'll see the same setting names, the same options, and the same configuration values regardless of where you interact and choose to deploy policy inside of Endpoint Manager. Let's talk a little bit about how Microsoft Intune will enable you to run with least privilege in your enterprise. We're making two discrete investments over the next few quarters that will allow you to run with least privilege in your enterprise. First, we're investing in Microsoft Cloud Labs. This is a product being built together between Microsoft Entra and Microsoft Intune to provide customers the experience they expect from a Labs product, local admin password solution in the cloud. This password management will have passwords stored in the cloud and will be available for Azure Active Directory as well as hybrid Azure Active Directory devices. And it should unblock customers who need to move to Azure AD only devices. We're going to have these components shipped natively with Windows, and they'll be managed from the cloud using Microsoft Intune as you come to expect for all configurations and policies you deploy in your environment. Rolling it out will be simple. You'll enable Cloud Labs as a feature or via policy, and then you'll target client-side policies to your endpoints. Once those policies are deployed to your endpoints, you'll have a rich set of options included there that allow you to tailor the experience and the configuration for your enterprise. Then you'll be able to recover the local admin password or rotate it on demand. And you'll have rich auditing and reporting that will allow you to see who used a password, who checked out a password essentially, and when the last time that password was rotated. That's key to making sure that these local accounts that have high privilege are secured properly and that you have insight into any activity with those accounts. Secondly, we're going to help organizations solve the privileging balancing act. Too often, end users are running with admin rights, and those admin rights lead to higher impact breaches and make it harder to contain threats once they make it into your environment. End users feel that they need admin rights because they need to be able to do things that they can do at home on their home PCs or they've been able to do in the past. Things like installing peripherals or installing applications or running these support diagnostic utilities. They can't do these things, they don't feel productive. And more importantly, not being able to do them may remove productivity from your business. So Microsoft is going to introduce a feature that we call Endpoint Privilege Management. This Endpoint Privilege Management feature will be available as part of Intune Advanced Management or as a standalone option. It'll allow you to provide a managed elevation experience for applications and executables and tasks in your environment that you trust. You'll have a rich set of insights for user experiences that require elevation, so that way you can make the right decisions about what end users need and when they need it. This toolset will also be designed to make removing admin privileges a reality, hopefully lowering the cost of users running as standard user, as well as giving you the tools and capability you need to remove them once and for all. We're defining 3 different elevation experiences that will be available as part of this toolset. The first is zero friction, and as the name implies, it'll allow end users to elevate with absolutely no friction. End users will be able to double click on an executable, an application, or create a task, and that task will launch seamlessly in the background with elevation. Second, we'll have an option called user confirmed. This user confirmed option will allow you as an organization to define which level of confirmation you need from an end user to permit the elevation to happen. This could be something as simple as a yes/no dialogue, similar to what you see with user account control today, or it could be something more robust, like additional authentication requirements or multi-factor authentication. This could also require additional information from the end user, things like a justification or so on and so forth, that you can use as an organization for auditing capability. So you don't only know what the user did and what device they did it on, you also know why they needed to do it. Lastly, we'll allow you to do support approved or support arbitrated elevations. These are really aimed at solving support driven and one-off scenarios, allowing you to unblock end users who need devices remediated, need applications, drivers, etc. installed or configured. So that way you're not giving broad access to the device, you're only giving access to this discrete set of tasks or this discrete task, whatever is approved, and also preventing you from needing to exchange high privilege accounts either on the endpoint or broadly in your environment so that you can complete these tasks, allowing a simple end user and admin experience where an end user requests and an admin approves that request to allow the elevation to occur. Finally, calls to action, let's do those in reverse. Least privilege, like we just talked about, you need to understand how running a standard user could fit into your enterprise and plan your journey to standard user if you haven't already gotten there. Think about ways that endpoint privilege management could impact your organization and lower your total cost of ownership for these devices. You should prepare for an EPM preview around the end of the year, first starting at private preview and then going to public preview afterwards. Next, with unified endpoint management, start using consistent policies across all your device types. Leverage Microsoft's combined management experience to lower the cost of ownership and to provide that insight and clarity to not just security teams, but IT teams as well. Give them the ability to see what each other are doing, so that way you can have a more coherent and consistent experience for configuring and managing your devices. And finally, on the adaptive access front, use conditional access to define basic device compliance controls through Intune and have those device compliance controls input into that authentication chain. As you mature with your controls, add more complex or more discrete or more functional controls that give you the security and capability you need to feel good about giving access to resources on healthy devices. Thanks for joining us as we discuss security best practices with Microsoft Intune. Hopefully you've found the session informative and have a good rest of your Ignite.